What's up, everybody? Just want to take a quick second and let people know that I am self-supported. I now put all of my episodes on Substack for paid subscribers. I put them up early, and then 24 hours later, I release them to the public on all my platforms. I also have Venmo, PayPal, Cash App, Buy Me a Coffee, Zelle, a PO Box, and I don't think Locals, Patreon. And all of the links are in the show notes of every single episode I put out. So look forward to continuing to provide great conversations. And thank you all for your continued support. Josh, good to see you. Thanks for coming back on here. We were just talking for a second, and both of us were like, well, let's hold on, because you were starting to tell me something. I was having a conversation on the phone with a friend of mine about an hour ago, I think along the lines of what we're about to discuss. So I'm going to turn over to you and what you were, I stopped you. We both stopped each other and we're like, oh, let's put this on the recording because this will be good.
Sure. Yeah. So I think it's a really interesting time here in the U.S. And I focus professionally on oil and gas investments, but and obviously we're going to talk about oil in the Middle East and so on. But it's a really interesting time because there's a lot of people who I think are very sort of broadly philosophically aligned on subjects like we see the latest revelations of enormous government fraud in California and New York, and the requirement to use identification to vote is somehow being blocked in Congress. And like it seems like the vast majority of people, at least that I'm aware of, are pretty unified on that. Stuff shouldn't get stolen, and that we should have voter IDs. And then we get sort of sidetracked on these relatively minor, they're important, I think, moral things or philosophical things. But the reality is that which side you pick in the Middle East, or if you're for or against certain kinds of intervention or whatever internationally, it's those things are relatively minor from a day-to-day perspective here in the US versus these very critical domestic issues that sadly we just never seem to get enough attention on. And this idea for me, like the voter ID thing, is just so wild that somehow it's anything other than just a mechanism for lower integrity elections. It sort of bothers me a lot. And we were talking about sort of how our sort of personal political differences on certain foreign issues are probably minor compared to this very large sort of domestic alignment, I think, across probably the vast majority of people here in the US.
Well, and I think too right, and I was talking to somebody in relation to 2020 and how at that period it seemed the line that had been laid out, it was you're on one side or you're on the other, right? And now as we go further down the line, 6 years later, it's like, and I was using the analogy, I don't know if this is a good analogy, but using the analogy of like, you're cutting, like a brownie or something out of the oven, you cut it down one line. And now what you're seeing things fragment within. So it was cut down one line, you were either on this side or that side. And I think we both know, what these sides were at that time for 2020. But now it's like it's becoming just more fragmented, more divided, more divided, more divided. And I think from my perspective is, where for regular people in relation to like, what should we be doing? What can we be doing? What's in the best interest of us? And, I don't know. I mean, I'm seeing more people like fight. More people, I don't know what good that's going to do, but, I'm kind of rambling, but that makes sense, Josh, what I said?
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, it was sort of like what I was saying. I think that there are these like really important things from a domestic perspective that do dramatically affect our lives. Tax day is coming up. We're paying all this money for stuff, and you can be pro or against the war in Iran. You can be pro or against whatever, and just the reality is that those things are a rounding error compared to $100 billion or something I saw a year in fraud just in California, and 30 or 50 or something billion a year just in Minnesota. Like these are the numbers if you sort of extrapolate that out nationally, these things that we're fighting over in terms of, at least from a fiscal perspective and economic perspective, are trivial compared to election integrity and compared to just the very widespread fraud. And then the degradation of civil society when you're asked to pay money when there's open fraud and you know that the open fraud is being funded by the money that you're paying, that you're forced to pay for taxes, it degrades civil society and degrades sort of patriotism and degrades sort of the meaning and the allegiance, I think, to basic institutions that I think have preserved a really high quality of life. So yeah, I think it's really important to remember as we have differences on a lot of different things, the things that we have in common. And I'm not running for elected office, by the way. I just like we were just talking about that before.
I'd vote for you, Josh. Well, because we're living in a griftocracy right now, right? I mean, this is what somebody said that to me, and it's not even a word, but I think it's so true for where we're at in our society. Like we are in a griftocracy. Like everywhere you go, there's a grift going on with fraud and
Well, let me talk about that just for a minute related
please.
to the Middle East, where there's something I did on social media that I thought I was commenting on one thing and it blew up in sort of a weirdly different way. So, unfortunately, Dubai, which is a beautiful place that has its own problems and whatever, but beautiful place has lots of wonderful, highly productive people that are doing all kinds of interesting things. It's sort of a major trade hub in the way that Houston's an energy hub. Dubai is really sort of an international trade hub. It's very important for a lot of things. But they were paying these sort of very trashy influencers to post on social media that it was physically safe at a time where with a tiny amount, you didn't even have to try. You could see missiles hitting buildings and drones hitting buildings and fragments hitting buildings. Like I couldn't actually avoid it. I wasn't even looking to see that. And I was seeing it over and over again. And they were real videos. They weren't fake. And so posting about how this it's ridiculous that they were paying these people who were trashy people with like weird like whether it was their backgrounds were in pornography or fighting or drugs or whatever like these weird sort of edge of society folks that were in some cases very famous in some cases marginal but just not people that you'd want to represent you not people you would think that or anyone would want to represent them and just commenting on that all these people were so upset like oh Dubai is safe and it's like well physically it's not it wasn't and unfortunately it's gotten a lot worse and I think they're more open about it now than they were a couple of weeks ago when I commented on it but even that just saying hey like one using trashy influencers to lie publicly doesn't help anyone like lying publicly doesn't help using these people doesn't help and then also getting mad at people for addressing that also it just sort of causes these unnecessary I think divisions and sort of leads to again this sort of rupture of the ability to discuss hey okay like what's actually happening if you have a family in Dubai like maybe you want them not to be there right now because you know that this is happening and maybe that's a healthy conversation to have and not something that should be suppressed through some combination of like throwing people that are talking about it in jail and then paying weird people to lie about that not being the case. And again, I hope it's safe and hope it like these missiles stop right away. Like that's not at all what I want. But like not being able to talk about these things really, I think, degrades interpersonal relationships and it degrades also as an analyst and as someone which hopefully we'll get to analyzing the oil market trying to figure out what's happening like not being able to talk about certain things really affects the ability to productively communicate and information gather and process and I think is unfortunate from a business perspective too.
Have you been there?
To Dubai no I've been to the region but not to Dubai specifically.
Yeah, I've seen the video. This is the other thing with all this, right? Like all these videos that come across. I don't know what's real. I don't know what's not real. You could show me. I saw the airport, people trying to get out. But that could be from 3 years ago. I would have no idea. I'm not there. And that's what's incredible about the times that we're living in because there's so many theories out there. There's so and which makes for good opportunities for conversations. But man. You try to sift through, and even when you think you might have found something, you still have no way to know. It's unbelievable, like the time that we're in right now.
Yeah, I mean, for professionally, I've had to figure out sort of mechanisms, and I'll get some stuff wrong, but there are ways to sort of tell what's actually happening. You can have a confidence interval, and there are some things that you can have sort of a higher or lower confidence interval on based on various sources that have been reliable on certain specific things or where they have sort of a specific edge. So there's some, and then also just having direct relationships and sort of being in a seat. Like John Arnold was interviewed recently. He talked about his success as becoming a multi-billion-dollar natural gas trader. And what he did is sort of through his success, he was able to pay people more and build all these relationships. And I'm not John Arnold, but through the relationships that I built, there's room to sort of get access to direct information or through one intermediary that's trusted for some specific reasons, whether it's monetary or other economic or for other reasons. So it's been possible. It's annoying, but it's possible to figure out more reliably what's going on for the most part. But some of it's actually intentional. Like I don't know if you followed this, but there was this controversy around if Netanyahu had been the prime minister of Israel, if he had been killed, and there were reasons that you could tell that he hadn't. Again, sort of getting back to those sort of direct connections and abilities to sort of fact check some of this stuff. But they actually leaned into it. They put what looks like a AI edited video up to validate that he was alive. And then they did a follow-up one, and they intentionally, it looks like, pulled some stuff out to make it look like more controversial, which was brilliant. You know, he's a politician, so he needs to get reelected. So he wants all these people to see him and to see him in this sort of controversial manner, but controversial in a humanitarian way. Is he alive or not? Is he, tipping the barista? Is he, complimenting people on whatever? And again, you can love him or hate him, but still acknowledge that one, if you're alive and everyone's saying you're dead, and you're a politician and a world leader, again, love him or hate him, using this sort of thing is sort of brilliant. And it's sort of, again, one of those weird things where you can fight these things, or you can do what he did and lean in very, very aggressively into this sort of age of disinformation. And again, whether you think it was a positive or negative for him politically also depends on sort of where you sit and how you feel about the country and him and whatever. But there is sort of this funny world where you don't know, like you were saying, what you're seeing, and then the people that are providing that to you can actually make it even more obscure in order to sort of turn something that should have been very boring into multiple viral videos and basically this whole like cult or large set of conspiracy theorists who have really strong views on this one way or the other based on mostly just their interpretation of things that again look like they were done intentionally in order to manufacture the attention.
Well, and then didn't one of his videos he has an extra finger or something too? Like that was
Yeah, it's amazing.
because I said that yesterday. I said every new video come out, do they add a finger? So he'll end up having 12 fingers in one video. It's just, I mean, the world that we're in, it's and the memes and stuff, during the election, I mean, like you're looking at some of this, I know the memes are a little bit different from the AI videos, but it's like, wow, what they can do. And just, it's just incredible. I don't know if well, here, ask you this. Is it a better time now with all this stuff versus 20 years ago where, you only had a couple sources to get your information from, a couple news outlets, papers, channels, or today's world?
So I think today's world is better because I think if you can construct some degree of certainty in an era of increased uncertainty and confusion, it can be extremely beneficial. So oil stocks have not gone up much since the US and Israel started bombing Iran. And some of it had to do with, I think, people's interpretations of various things, and some of it had to do with various, I think, miscommunications or people believing too much, what Trump said about it or what XYZ analysts said or thought or whatever. And that sort of, and it looks like actually in retrospect, this was manufactured confusion to try to suppress the price for oil, which had the knock-on effect, I don't think they cared, of suppressing the price of energy stocks, the share prices of the Exxons and Chevrons all the way down. And so being able to see that and understand to some extent what was going on was a great opportunity because these stocks basically went almost nowhere for a week and then they went up almost straight up as other stocks went down for another week. And I'm sort of oversimplifying it, but there's great opportunities where, again, if you just put that little bit of effort, or maybe it's a lot of effort, I don't know, but you put the effort in to be able to to be able to validate stuff. And again, it's not perfect, and I get stuff wrong all the time, but having that ability to have a higher degree of confidence in a particular thing, but it's already out there, so there's room, there's less of a I think the error band is smaller, even though there's more so because of the more information, but also because of the widespread uncertainty, I think again, just driven by people's unwillingness to invest the time or attention or effort or money or combination of those in order to be able to get sort of more accuracy on some of this stuff.
Are you surprised that the oil prices have not climbed higher since this all started? And let me ask you, it appeared that Besant was shorting the oil market Sunday evening, correct? And correct me if I'm wrong by saying any of this.
So we don't know for sure. What we know for sure is that there had been almost no communication around the Treasury or Fed intervening in oil markets historically. And for the first time that I can remember, and again, I have to go look back to see if they ever talked about it before, but for the first time ever, 2 weeks ago, they talked about how they might do it. It was floated, and various people commented on it. And then after a few days, they talked about how they didn't do it. And there is this saying that you should never believe anything until it's officially denied. And this was supposed to be for, I think this was a saying that came out of like communist Russia, right? So it's sad that that would be applicable to American politics and other places, but there is a certain amount of truth to that. So we cannot say for certain that there was or is intervention in the futures market. But if you apply that simple, like the question always is like, why am I so lucky? Why am I hearing this? And why am I hearing this now? Right? These are sort of the general questions I think on any information, whether you're an investment analyst or just sort of trying to be an educated individual. And so, I think this fits into that framework where why am I hearing about how the Treasury talked about shorting oil, and then why are they saying that they didn't? Like what who said they did up until when they said that they didn't and when they said that they might? Is a very weird, interesting thing for them to interject into the conversation about oil, period. In terms of should prices be higher? Yes, sort of. So this is a giant event. And prices are high off the coast of Oman for oil. Oil's right now close to $170 a barrel physical delivery right now outside of the Strait of Hormuz. And so, it's about $100 WTI or a little under that as we're talking. And so, and there is a cost for shipping. It should be less. That band will narrow substantially in my view over time. But it makes sense that with all these ships stuck in the strait, in the Persian Gulf, that there would be a wide temporary dislocation. And it does look extreme in one direction. And whether it's the Treasury shorting or whether people just having faith in Trump being able to keep the oil price low through various statements he's making and that his administration's making, or some combination, I'm not sure. But the price does seem too low and does seem likely to rise to the extent that this conflict continues for some time.
When these ships are just stuck out there, I mean, are they like in the middle of the water? Or are they at a port? Or like, I think of like the movie. Maybe I'm really aging myself. Pirate Radio, where they're just a sea. Like, what are they doing?
They're in some cases they're sort of moving around in like irregular patterns. Some of them have their AIS, sort of their transponder, their people to see where they are on, and others don't, or flash it or intentionally put it in other spots to project it out to spoof it to try to make it harder to attack them or to hide if they're illicitly transporting sanctioned oil or so on. So there's a lot of different things, but mostly they're moving sort of in small, almost random looking type patterns as they're waiting.
So, Trump making statements. It's one thing to make statements, but what kind of actions could be done to help curb the price increases?
So there is a very large strategic petroleum release happening right now, here in the US and across Western countries. And it is significant. There are various oil analysts and sort of market pundits who are making a really big deal about how comparatively small it is versus the undersupply from the strait. And I think they sort of miss the point, which is that it is a physical action that's being taken to partially mitigate the shortage. Does it fully mitigate it? No. Is it enough? No. Does it move the needle? Absolutely. If you provide 10% or 20% of something that's needed, that is much better than providing 0% of it. It does actually physically address some of the most acute undersupply aspects of a crisis. And so the way they're structuring it here in the US is it's essentially a loan where you can borrow oil from release soon and you have to pay back 20% more, let's say in a couple years. I don't remember the exact date on when it needs to come back, but there's essentially a very high borrow cost for that physical oil. And it has to be delivered in some cases to different spots, in some cases to similar spots. There's variances on quality and so on, whether it's sour or sweet that needs to get delivered back. But that's the basic mechanism. And so it's forcing the spot price of WTI down, and it's forcing the futures curve price a year or two out up. And so that's been helpful for the equities. I think that's part of why oil and gas stocks over the last couple of days have started to shift is because of the traders sort of moving around their physical positioning and then moving around their futures positioning. And then people trade oil stocks and related equities based on their expectation of the future price, which they gear off of the forward curve, which is always wrong. So it's not a prediction, which many are using it for still, but it is where you can lock in your price today at moderate volume at any point in the next number of years.
But also though the reserve was down to what its lowest level prior to when Trump came back into office. So how much can they tap into this to where because it was already at a very 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 low or the lowest level it's been into for I don't know how many years. How much time will this buy you?
Yeah, it was very frustrating. I mean, the SPR was built in the US because of the problems that were experienced in the Gulf in the 1970s and early 1980s. So it was for this. And it was very frustrating that it was used. I complained a lot publicly around the use, not in that initial 1 month period after Russia invaded Ukraine. That was, I think, excusable because you didn't know how big of the disruption was going to be. But as soon as it was clear that Russian oil was going to be allowed onto the market and that even European countries would be buying Russian oil and gas, which has been this giant scandal that they're essentially funding Russia to attack Ukraine while funding Ukraine and giving Ukraine weapons. It's been this just horrific from a humanitarian perspective and very confusing from a moral and policy perspective. But as soon as it became clear that Russian oil was coming onto the market in, let's say, May of 2022, that SPR release should have been stopped. And instead, they dumped the oil onto the market to crash the price, which was effective because the market was well supplied, especially with the SPR oil coming onto the market. So, like you're saying, we came in after this very cynical, giant release of oil to essentially win a midterm election and then to increase the odds of re-election or election of the VP when the president was not able to run again. So yeah, it was very very problematic. That being said, I don't see any reason to doubt the ability, at least for the initial quantities, for the SPR to be able to release at, let's say, just the U.S. one to be able to release at, let's say, close to 1 million barrels a day. That seems really reasonable. And were some of them damaged? Maybe. Are there contamination issues? Probably on some of it. Can they deliver that first, let's say, 50 or 100 million barrels pretty effectively, pretty safely at a contamination level that should be addressable from the refineries that receive it? Yeah, it should be. It should be okay.
Well, I think also, to put in perspective, you can't, it's not like refilling a pool, right? Like you can't just come into office and get this thing back up to 100%. I mean, how long would it have taken to, because they were in the process of refilling it.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Trump administration has not gotten a lot of credit for this. They tried to refill it when oil prices went negative or very low during COVID, and Trump did not have control of Congress at the time, and Congress refused to fund it. So, if anything, if you wanted to pick sides from a political perspective, it was Democrats in the U.S. that blocked refilling in 2020 at very low prices, which would have been very economic, and then that dumped it in 2022 and 2024 for sort of political gain. And then Trump did try to refill it, but it does get damaged to some extent when it's used. There's arguments that the Biden administration pulled it down too hard in 2022 and pulled too much out too quickly and damaged it. There's other arguments that just using it damages it to some extent. And even though in theory it's meant to be reusable, it's not exactly reusable like a car tank of gas where you just use it and refill it. It's a lot more complicated as a storage mechanism. So they were trying. It was expensive to fix. They were working on fixing it. They were working on refilling it. There was some reasonable effort to refill it. Could it have been done faster? Probably. Could have been done more. Yeah. But the direction of travel, I think, under Trump leading up to this was probably the right direction on the SPR front. And again, I haven't been shy about criticizing them on a number of other energy policies and fronts, but on this particular thing, they were going the right direction on it.
In relation to other SPRs across the world, because I'm reading about other countries that are tapping into. Seems like they all are at this point, Josh. Tapping into their
Yeah,
reserves.
except China. China's weird. China's been trying to put in orders to buy a whole bunch more oil, and they're sort of out competing some of their neighboring countries. And they're the strangest thing, and this is sort of a tangent, but Iran has mostly stopped the flow of oil through the Strait of Hormuz, other than Iranian oil and some of these sanctioned tankers, which are all going to China, pretty much. And so it's very strange to me that the U.S., where we have these naval ships, we have all this capacity there, is not blocking Iranian oil exports, which are sanctioned and which are actually arguably more fair targets than maybe some of the stuff we're bombing, and also much less, loss of life by doing that, as well as more fair versus what we did with Venezuela at the start of the year, which under what, I mean, whatever, that's a very long sort of complicated story and debate and question, but we did seize multiple Venezuelan oil tankers with Venezuelan oil. They weren't Venezuelan flagged, and we are not seizing tankers with Iranian oil and Iranian refined products, LPG, etc. And so that's very strange. But anyway, that stuff is going to Iran, and Iran has been buying other unsanctioned cargoes as well, which is just very strange considering that they're claiming that they have this 1.2 or so billion barrel SPR. If they have that much oil and supposedly they only use 14 million barrels a day, that's a lot of days that they have versus most of the rest of the world in terms of reserves and storage.
So you think, based upon what you just said, then China, they're claiming they have a larger reserve than the rest of the world, but it almost like it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I posted about this on X like a year and a half ago, and got like a crazy amount of flack. I just wanted to like share a crazy theory and hear if there was any reasonable pushback. So the Twitter trolls and the like stock promoter guys doing really sketchy legal stuff or whatever, they all hated it. They hate me because I'll talk about their stuff sometimes. But the the oil traders I know, the guys that actually interact with, the various national oil companies and some of the independents in China, they were like, this is brilliant and right. And I'm like, what do you mean? And they're like, yeah, like they rip us off all the time. They lie to us and say we're not buying cargoes, and then they turn around and buy them last second. They, they say we're never buying oil again, and then they show up 2 months later and buy it all when it's at a 10-cent discount. So the people who knew on this knew. And then I kept running into the satellite data providers where no one believes anything about Chinese economic data, deservedly, because China has just been making up their economic data in both directions for like 2 decades. Like it's just their policy. They just don't want people to really know what they're doing in both directions. But no one believes any Chinese economic data deservedly, except for some reason they believe China's oil consumption and oil storage numbers. And they believe them because the satellite data providers say that the tanks are XYZ full, and that's a portion of the oil. But I posted, hey, like if you look at the old American Express salad oil scandal where they had the tanks up, but it was oil on the top and then water the rest of the way, and you could sort of hook it up so when someone comes to test it, you could get oil and not water out the bottom for the salad oil scandal. In China, they're not even, it's them. So who's going to know that they don't have this 1.2 billion barrels of oil in storage? And historically, they've been a buyer at low points and a seller at high points. Why are they a buyer here at, $100+ a barrel, depending on where they're contracting it and what they're doing and so on. So, I think there's some real questions. And then if you think about who China's leadership probably hates the most in life, other than me at this point, and other than dissidents who they, do not live long and do not enjoy their remaining days in their lives, are the satellite data providers, because they're basically out there every day saying that the Chinese leadership is lying, right? And they're showing data to show that they're lying about these economic statistics that they like to lie about. And so, wouldn't it be wonderful if they could suppress the price of oil, which they probably have been doing if this is happening, by 10 or 20 or whatever dollars a barrel by claiming they have all this storage. And then when it eventually comes out, instead of getting flack, they sort of don't care because everyone sort of knows that they're making up their numbers. This will just be added to the list of every other economic statistic they're making up, right? In addition to that, it makes these guys who they hate because they call them liars every day, look terrible and look like they've been providing wrong numbers for all these years that, people, hedge funds and, various economic analysis folks and whatever have been relying upon. So to me, it looks like a win-win for them with a huge economic incentive measured in tens of billions of dollars. So maybe they're not doing it, but I mean, the more you think about it, if they have a huge economic incentive and it's a political win for them and it makes them look more powerful, then why not? And then if you think about why they wouldn't have been buying all this oil, well, they've had real economic challenges. And so, why would they have been buying the oil when they could have been taking that money and backstopping local banks and preventing real estate companies from going bankrupt and stimulating XYZ thing in the latest ridiculous 5-year communist plan that's bound to fail. So, that would be the other reason why it could have been happening is, again, like they would just rather not have tied up their money in oil and storage versus one of the myriad of things that are higher priority for them politically or were up until this point.
Who in your view then is in the worst shape in terms of tapping the reserves and at risk of that running down to running dry?
Well, the worst shape right now is these Gulf states, the Qatar and UAE and Saudi to some extent, although Saudi's getting some oil out, excuse me, and getting a very high price for it. So, some of these Gulf states, Iraq also, their blackouts and stuff. I think that's very tough. But outside of that region, you can see in the Philippines they've had some shortages. South Korea was an exporter; they're having some shortages already. So yeah, I'd look at the East Asian countries and I'd look at some of the Western European countries as potential big losers on this.
So you say South Korea. What about North Korea? Or is that one of those countries you just have no idea?
Don't know.
Isn't Australia another one where I mean, they're having major, I mean, everybody's having challenges with this, but isn't Australia like on that kind of red line then too?
Yeah, I mean, some of like our least favorite people, I think from a political perspective, who are sort of the most hypocritical and ridiculous, are suffering the most on this, where Australia had been sort of outsourcing their emissions, pretending like they're green and whatever, and importing diesel from China. And they were importing the diesel from China in order to be able to mine iron ore and various other commodities that they were then sending to China. And China put in a refined product and oil export ban a couple of weeks ago. And so Australia is no longer getting to import diesel in order to export iron ore and various other commodities to China.
How long can some of these countries continue in this path then? Like say for Japan, for example, or the Philippines or Australia, before things really go to a different level of problem?
Um, I mean, there's already problems, but it's not like you just fully run out, probably. You end up with rationing and you end up with other sorts of things, sort of like what happened in the 1970s energy crises. So, they're already having problems, and I think those problems build from here. So it's hard to give exact number of days because again, like let's say you had 100 days of oil and refined products. Well, if you clamp down on a lot of stuff, maybe it's 200 days, but you have no mining activity and no home building and a few other things like that, which are very bad economically, but also not maybe necessary to do day to day.
What are your thoughts on Cuba? Because I had Anas Alhaji on a few months ago, and unless I misunderstood him, I thought Cuba was getting their oil from Mexico since they were no longer able to get it from Venezuela, but with the blessing of the United States, they were getting it from Mexico. Is that not the case anymore, or was it? Did I mishear him? Or
I just don't follow small scale oil flows. So I have a small investment firm and I write this newsletter for fun on the side. And what I find helps understand the oil market is not to be the expert in everything, but to be the expert in the few things that actually matter. And again, that's one of those things where like, the internet expects you to be the expert in everything. And it's very uneconomic to do that. Very like it's way better in my view to be right coming into this year that there wasn't a super glut for oil, which everyone else got wrong. Everyone. It was amazing how many people were massively bearish oil at 50. They're like sell, short. It's amazing. So that matters a lot, right? Like knowing how much oil is going to Cuba and where it's coming from, honestly, from an oil market perspective, does not matter. It is a 0% relevance from an oil economic analysis perspective. Yeah, like their oil is probably cut off. They're having blackouts. It does look like sort of that Venezuela pattern. It's possible that we'll annex them. Trump has sort of made noises in that direction, potentially also on Venezuela, although that'd be very weird and I don't really understand how that would work. Cuba is a lot simpler from that perspective. We already have Puerto Rico. I don't know that we want Cuba or I can't, I'm not endorsing any of that, obviously, but just trying to read between the lines and see what might happen. That does seem like that's a thing that could be happening. And so, yeah, it wouldn't be surprising that their oil imports are either restricted because they're being blocked by the US or just because they can't afford it because their economy is in collapse, which is the inevitable consequence of communism. It always ends one direction, one way with, mass, killings and imprisonments and terrible life and terrible quality of living and economic collapse. And so, Cuba is just the latest of many, many countries to try this thing, claim it hasn't been done the right way before, and then have the same exact result as everyone else had and fail.
when you go the opposite of what the masses say in your respective field, and people were telling you were crazy, right? That you were way wrong, and you're going to be wrong, and then you prove to be right. One, how does that make you feel? And two, do you second guess yourself in like the hypothesis as you're putting this out there?
Yeah, I mean, if I have any view on the oil market that is non-consensus, I try to read every educated view that is data backed, that's, relevant in terms of setting the consensus. And the more there is to substantiate it, the less confident I am in my analysis. This one though was just like it was this weird combination of folks who hated Trump and sort of wanted to show that Trump's energy policies were failing because there was a glut which was going to force US production down. So it was going to fail the drill baby drill thing. So that was the IEA. Best I can tell, I'm projecting motivations, but they've said some of this stuff, but not all of it. And then the EIA trying to show per the Trump administration, it looks like request. And Chris Wright has been a massive disappointment, sadly, here as the energy secretary and not accomplished almost any of the stuff he was supposed to. So, per his instruction, hey, show a forecast of a huge oversupply, but showing evidence that we're drill baby drilling. When the rig count's falling, the data. So again, like I would look at it, and I chatted with, I'm friends with a bank analyst who had been bullish oil and got very bearish early last year. And we chatted about this analysis he had done a few years ago, analyzing per foot oil well productivity. So not just how much oil is coming out of any individual well, but how much you have to put in
You freeze on me, Josh? Freeze on me a second?
Locations
Oh,
essentially
you
versus
froze.
drilling
You
at two.
froze. You froze for a second.
Uh-oh.
No, you're good. You're good
Okay.
now. You're fine.
So if you do a 4 mile lateral, you use twice as many locations as you do if you drill 2 mile laterals. And so if you get 20% more production or even 40% more production from a 4 mile lateral, you're robbing from the future because you're only drilling one well instead of two, and you're only getting, 1.4 times the production when you should get two times the production. So you could see this, and he hadn't done it and others hadn't done it. And they all just were looking. It was this really weird circular thing. They're all looking at each other. I used to be on TV a decent amount, CNBC, Bloomberg, whatever. They took me off, right? For like a year, I was on like CNBC Middle East. I think they thought it was funny that I was like the last oil bull or whatever. So they'd have me on occasion. Al Jazeera used to have me on pre-COVID. I think that was the same joke. It was like, oh, this Jewish guy in Houston losing money in oil. Let's like have him on and see what happens. So not as cynical, but similar sort of idea, I think. And it was amazing because you could just see it would be like you count, okay, well, here's the top 50, substacks. And here's like, are they bullish oil? No, they're bearish, ultra bearish. Commodity prices will never go up in the future, which was wild. The top selling person, I don't know why anyone would listen to that or why. Like, it's completely contrary to the history of the world, but cool. Similar on TV, similar in the newspaper. And it's fascinating and sort of weird to me to see some of these guys start to change, at least partially change their views eventually, what they were saying short oil at 50 and here it is at 100, and now they're saying buy. It's like just this like weird crazy, but so in the middle of that, of course, I was rerunning my numbers and looking at the things and trying to actively ignore the Cubas of the world and really closely pay attention to the Russias of the world. And it turns out that when you do that and you focus your attention and resources on the things that matter, you're not perfect. I get a lot of things wrong, but you can get more things right if you focus on the things that seem likely to matter. And similar on investments and stuff. Like, I think it's just like people care so much about this nonsense and very little about the things that actually drive investment returns.
And you got to take the emo. One thing I've learned. Not that I'm not an expert in anything, Josh. I'm really good at asking open-ended questions of people. I think that's my telemarketing background when I was 15. What, where, why, how, and who. So I guess I'm an expert in that. But it's removing the emotion out of some of these things. To your point, and what makes the most financial sense in whatever it is you invest in. One of the things that I want. Oh, go ahead.
Can I talk about that for a
Please.
second? So there's one view that I changed this year that I got it. It was weird because they were like, oh, permable when I was bullish natural gas last year. And then in January, I came out and said, hey, I am bearish US natural gas this year, bearish Canadian gas this year. It's not going to work. We did a ton of analysis. I was working on my update for 2026, a fund letter, and some stuff for the Substack, and did the work. And it was just not right to be bullish gas at $5 an MCF here in the US. It was just wrong. And the data changed and the production was higher and there were some one-offs, but it was enough that it was going to shift the balances for this year. And I came out bearish on gas. And the weird thing is I still get permabull, right? Whatever. You still get called all the same names, but then you also get all the people who were bullish gas, loved you because you were bullish gas, mad at you too. So it's not a popularity game. And again, like in the end, I measure my world based on my net performance to my clients for my investment firm, and then I measure it via the measured performance of the individual ideas that I share on this newsletter versus the broader oil stock ETFs, and we use XOP in particular, but you pick it, whatever. And so in the end, that was very educational to me because emotions aside, right, it was like a little weird to do, but the data changed, communicated that very clearly, and here we are. Gas is $3 and no one cares at all, but I care, and my returns matter, and they're very different than my peers who stayed bullish gas way too long and stayed underweight oil way too long. And the index is up, let's say 20 for the year, and there's room in the oil stocks to be up 50, and there was room in the gas stocks to be down 10. and really mattered a lot this year to get the long oil. I wasn't short gas, but I just massively underweighted it coming in, and it really made a big difference. So again, the emotions, it's sort of, I think for me it's a little easier, maybe a lot easier, because I just don't. I sort of like, everyone cares a little. Social proof matters. We're a social species, but like that's not what I'm solving for. I'm solving for maximizing my return by any sort of legal means available, and that involves changing my mind when the data changes.
Thank you for sharing that story, by the way. I think that's very important because, again, as you go farther down the line, things are subject to change, and it's all about not being an absolutist in anything, right? And 100% certain in something, except for death and taxes. I listened to your conversation last night on Macro Edge, and I have to tell you, Josh, I actually felt better listening to you for an hour because there are times, and really lately for myself, I'm looking at things, I'm like, man, I mean, I'm in the Dubai of the Southwest. Like, there's no water. Like, oil prices are going up. Gas prices are going up. What if there's a power? Denver International Airport had a power outage this morning.
I did not.
Yeah, a friend of mine texted me because he was there, and then it was kind of hitting the news circuits. But I thought to myself, I'm like, God, what was I thinking? What was I thinking staying here another year? Like, but then I was listening to you, and which I encourage people to follow Macro Edge and listen to Josh's conversation he did last night. It's quite good. But you're not as, I don't want to say optimistic, and I don't want to characterize what you were trying to explain, but I didn't feel, I felt a sense of optimism from you. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I mean, okay, so first of all, if you live in a place that has insufficient water and has demographics that are demanding more water, and farms that are uneconomically subsidized, pulling water away from residents' provision, like they do in California, where the almond people and the pomegranate people sort of take the water from the cities. If you're experiencing that, that is cause for pessimism and cause for water realism. So I make no promises on, like, look, I mean, if you're in California, you're experiencing an energy crisis and it's getting worse. If you're in the Southwest, you may experience a water crisis. I can make no promises on that. That's just physics, right?
Right.
Like, you just gotta don't not do the math, because I'm optimistic about things generally. But look, I think we'll be fine. I think the economy will be fine. I think we might suffer through a recession. I think that there's a lot of distortions in the economy. I think there's a lot of waste in, we started out with me ranting about this fraud issue where there's maybe $1 trillion a year getting stolen across the US for fake healthcare and fake whatever, fake leering, just terrible stuff that's real and you can see and you can check and it's real. So that stuff's all bad, and a lot of that supports other activity economically that probably should go away. But things are getting better, and we have fantastic technology, and there's always this impetus to try to scare us and try to tell us, hey, things are getting worse, therefore go socialist, go communist, go get the Islamist to be your mayor in a city that suffered from horrible terrorism not too long ago from folks that are ideological allies of their current mayor. And I think it's really important to be able to step back from that and say, hey, like, are things better? How do I measure prosperity? How do I measure economic growth? And there have been many wrong turns, I think, here in the U.S., but I think generally speaking, thanks a lot to the oil field workers, who I will publicly defend when Federal Reserve employees knock them and joke about them losing their cars and other like crazy stuff that you'll see on the internet, like truly wild and terrible. But like,
I never
these
see any of
people
that.
have
Not to interrupt you. So what do they do?
the person responsible for engaging publicly with the energy industry from the Federal Reserve was joking about energy workers oil field workers losing their trucks, because the oil price went temporarily from 120 down to 80 or something, and that Sunday evening to Monday morning and Monday afternoon move. That's not unusual, unfortunately. That's sort of unfortunately par for the course and bipartisan. But I think there's been a lot of sacrifice by people who work in dangerous and difficult jobs with very low job certainty and economic certainty, and by a lot of executives and technologists and so on in the U.S. energy industry and fertilizers and chemicals and sort of across the US real economy. There's been tremendous innovation that's allowed us to be, I think, very resilient in this current energy crisis. And I don't think you might run out of water in the Southwest because building a city where there's 2 million people, but there's only enough water for 200,000 people. That's not on these people. That's on you moving there, living there in particular. But the energy provision is really, I mean, it's remarkable how much gas we're getting out of some of these wells and how efficiently we can burn it and all the wonderful things that we can do with it. And then American technologists on the high tech side, yeah, some of it's going towards, clicking on better ads on Facebook or whatever, but a lot of it's also, we're very interconnected. We're able to do this thing where, we're sitting in different cities and talking via these devices and, connected in this way. And thousands of people can listen to this and watch this and so on. And so I think we're in a really good position from a resilience perspective. And what may happen with the stock market for overvalued stocks and hypey whatever, I would be bearish on potentially, and very bearish if I was exposed to these various frauds and stuff, because I do think eventually there's going to be significant action, because you can't sustain a system where there's active theft of the scale that we're seeing right now and that's being documented and exposed. But I think things are actually pretty good, and energy efficiency is really remarkable. Energy productivity is remarkable, and there's millions of people, probably tens of millions of people, working really hard to ensure that and improve it every day as we're sitting here and chatting about it.
Yeah, the my friend Jim Kunstler used the term talking about Phoenix and Las Vegas. 'Cause I said the city wasn't designed for to handle this many millions of people. He goes, Mike, it wasn't designed for anything. It was a good idea at the time. Started with one street and then add another street. And then you get enough streets, you build a freeway. Then you build another freeway and then you connect them. Las Vegas, the same thing, right? You just build out and build out and build out, not realizing that your number one resource is the desert with no water.
Yeah, I mean, the other issue there is you can't even do desalination, which the folks in the Middle East are doing, because you don't even have an ocean there. So, where are you going to get your water from? It's a real that honestly, I'm not so bullish on. I would be a little worried. I don't know what happens. I hope that they figure out a solution there. And again, brilliant engineers, brilliant urban planners. I hope there is a solution there. But again, the specific pessimism on like availability of gasoline in California or availability of water in the high desert after millions of people moved there, availability of free flowing traffic in Miami where twice as many people are living there now, and they didn't expand the streets and they still block it when the little boats go through on Miami River. Those are things I think it's reasonably pessimistic about, because you can just see it and understand that that's more of a physics thing than it is a policy change, at least anytime soon.
Yeah, Craig Fuller points out when I've had him on, it stuck with me. His first time we spoke, he said, "Mike, you moved to a place without water. What did you think?" He goes, "I'm in Tennessee. I got plenty of water, but how can I get it to you? I can't put it on a trailer, a semi truck, and deliver it." I said, "Well, why don't we can build a water slide or something, like, and the water could just flow all the way through."
Yeah, I don't know. Again, like even like aqueducts and stuff, just at the scale that it's needed, I don't know. I don't know how it gets resolved. And historically, if you look back, there have been cities and civilizations that have fallen due to varying rainfall and growing beyond their available resources. So I think there is a historical argument on that to be. But again, I don't know. I'm not sure how it gets resolved. And we were actually talking off camera. My grandpa was a home builder in the Paradise Valley and Phoenix area in the 1950s. So maybe he contributed to some of the problem that's there. Although I think the density, he was building houses with 1 acre of land. So I think if that area had one house, one single family home per acre of land, there probably wouldn't be a water issue for the population.
There's probably so much multifamily on that land now that it's We were talking offline. I'm going to go drive around to see if I can find one of his houses because I'd be curious how many are left of the thousand or so you said he built. I know I'm running out of time here with you. So coming back to what you were talking about on Macro Edge last night and in relation to gas prices, and we're talking about globally or internationally, do you see some of those problems coming here where you might see rationing at this point? And I know it can change, but what does your crystal ball tell you?
I think any rationing outside of California, where that's, very policy specific and just having weird onerous regulations and forcing refineries out of business, and then regulations on what gasoline is even allowed to be sold. So California may have some real issues soon. Outside of that, no, I think the U.S. is very well provided. And sorry, I went on that long tangent, but I think we're very well provided on energy, on fertilizer. Costs will go up because these are global commodities and they're global products, but I would not expect any sort of gas lines. I would not expect any sort of real outages, again, other than the Californias where there's some specific policy issue. And again, like even if California, even if they change their policies tomorrow, there's the negative lag of the effects of their policies for a long time. So forcing refiners out of business is sort of hard to, once they're gone and their refineries are decommissioned, you have to build a new one and they're massively expensive and they take forever to build. So, I think we're really well positioned here. I think Canada is really well positioned. I think it would be much better if Canada was producing more oil and had better transportation connections, both to the West Coast and to the East Coast and to down here to the US. So I think it would be better in that circumstance, but you can't, similar to California, you can't sort of go back. Hopefully they can make some policy changes, but I think the US, I think Canada, I think we're generally very well positioned. And I actually saw someone today on X posting about how they thought that might actually not be an accident that this would have happened at this time where this is such an economic advantage for the US that there might actually be some foreign policy and trade policy and other motivations to sort of trigger this, or at least lean into it after maybe not anticipating it getting this bad.
You talk about the conflict in the Middle East.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, the
uh,
conflict, but also then a motivation for that, or for continuing that potentially being that the U.S. is so advantaged here versus parts of Europe and parts of Asia, and even again, let's see on China in terms of this theory. And again, it's a theory. I don't know whether China has the oil that they're, I'm not underwriting my investments based on them having anything less than the 1.2 billion barrels that they claim to have in their SPR. They may have less for the reasons I said, but yeah, I think even relative to China, even if they have that SPR fully in place, the U.S. is so significantly advantaged because we're actually producing the oil and NGLs and gas that we need, and we're getting what we're not producing from Canada and now from Venezuela, and we're exporting the things that we don't need as much of and a lot of natural gas. And so there are real economic advantages to the U.S. It's not just that we're going to be fine from this, it's that the U.S. real economy, excluding some of the high tech jobs and some of the ultra high market valuations of some of these big tech companies and similar, outside of that, there may actually be some real economic benefit from the current situation lasting for some period of time.
so what you're telling me, Josh, is it's not going to be Mad Max here, is what you're saying, basically, in simple
No,
terms.
yeah, just make sure you have enough water in Phoenix, and you should be fine.
All right, Elad, one more question. If you got time for one more question?
Sure.
The this is the other thing too, kind of coming back full circle, the idea of like what to believe, what not to believe. The petrodollar versus the petro yen, or the dollar losing the reserve currency status from all this. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I have trouble with some of these concepts, petrodollar or eurodollar, or some of these other things. Like I've been to like the eurodollar trading pits. I know it's not the same concept, but I'd argue there are analogies in terms of people trying to use these concepts as frameworks to understand trade relationships and currency dynamics and the world through those lenses. I've been to the Eurodollar pit. I think it was at the CME. A cousin who was a floor trader there many years ago, and it was just an exchange. It was just people trading these futures, calling in orders, and they were picking up the phone, and it was just like hog futures or crude oil is not. There's not this thing. So yeah, does it matter that the U.S. dollar is used as a sort of main currency for oil? Maybe, yeah, it doesn't hurt for sure the value of the dollar. But how much of that is because the US has forced it, and how much of that is because, relatively speaking, the US has maintained, and again, this is on a relative basis, rule of law, economic prosperity, relatively low regulations, relatively low taxes, across an industrial base and economy that's been top performing in the world starting in the post World War II period or even sort of middle of World War II on. And so I would just think about it more simply, hey, are we losing our reserve currency status from some big economic slip or some big sort of failure and policy? I don't know that it matters so much if some countries choose to use a far inferior, way less based currency. And there is currency debasement. All paper currencies over time become worth a lot less, but you have to sort of decide, I think, which currency you're going to use. And I have this $100 trillion Zimbabwe note behind me, which is don't get excited. It's not worth. I think it's a collector's item now, so maybe it's worth $50 or something, but it's certainly not worth 100 trillion, sadly. And Zimbabwe is a great case in failure of centralized economies and confiscation of economic resources. Based on wacko ideologies and racial driven stuff and so on. And so, I think the U.S. dollar, to the extent that we continue on the path that we're on right now over the last, let's say, year or so, and maybe the broader economic path the U.S. has pursued since World War II, I don't think the dollar is going anywhere anytime soon. And I'm not bullish oil because I think the dollar is going to fall apart as some sort of, broad currency that's used to facilitate transactions globally. I think oil is undersupplied. Obviously, right now it's undersupplied, but there's been underinvestment in the sector for over a decade, and it's cyclical. And so underinvestment leads to higher prices, and then that leads to overinvestment, which leads to lower prices. It's very, very simple. And I don't know that it's necessary to buy into these very I'm a University of Chicago trained economist. I understand the theories. I'm not saying I don't understand them. I'm saying that I think that the use of them, when you use really complicated things to try to explain things that can be explained, I think, for the most part, much more simply, there's just this, to me, it seems likely that it's just not the right theory that Occam's razor holds to some extent, and that Occam's razor on economic analysis holds as much as on economic theories, where if you're choosing to examine something, if you're choosing to evaluate oil flows around the world based on how much oil is showing up in Cuba versus choosing to evaluate oil flows based on the trajectory of shale productivity in the US and how much oil is actually getting out of Russia and OPEC plus spare capacity, and OPEC missing their quotas over a number of months, a number of years at certain key times. I think you end up with very, very different results over time by focusing on the things that actually matter. So long way of saying, yeah, I don't know if petrodollar is really a thing. I don't think it matters at all if Iran goes and sells a few cargoes of oil in yuan. Good luck spending it, and then also good luck trying to do that again in the future when you don't have the whole Strait of Hormuz hostage and an undersupply globally of 10 to 20% of the world's oil, a bunch of the refined products, and 20% or so of global natural gas exports.
Where can people find you, Josh?
So my easy public facing thing is Bison Insights. It's my blog, bisoninsights.info. I've been sharing a bunch of stock ideas and economic analysis there. It's fun. It's not investment advice. It's not very expensive, and it's really easily accessible. And then, so that's bisoninsights.info. And then my day job is running an investment firm where we invest in publicly traded oil and gas companies. And that's only available to accredited investors, and none of this is an offer or a solicitation. And anyone that's relevant for that and interested in learning more about it can check it out at bisoninterests.com.
Now, what is your schedule like these days? Doing a full-time job, running the investing firm, and then following what's going on in the Middle East, doing media appearances, doing your own Substack. Walk me through what an average day looks like for you right now.
Oh man. Well, you forgot I have three kids under five, and the 4-year-old is now doing his sleep regression. So basically, I don't sleep because I'm working so much, and because my children have decided that I should not sleep. And so, yeah, day to day, checking relevant news, following up on important stuff via direct and really good sort of indirect connections on that early morning, following up on news on companies that I'm following that I'm either invested in or considering investing in or are relevant in some meaningful way, checking on data on the oil market and then also news on the oil market and so on, and doing similar sort of fact checks on that stuff. Um, Generally talking to companies, I'd say on average, talk to one or two companies a day, somewhere in there, between conferences and calls and so on, traveling for conferences. I don't know. I'm sorry. I don't know if this is boring, but
No,
there's
no,
just
no.
so much stuff. And then media appearances, like you said, and then throughout the day, checking stocks, figuring out where I'm adding or cutting, um, and then fitting in, usually in the afternoons, late afternoons, media appearances, and then also, spending some time on the blog and figuring out sort of what I'm going to write about and doing some of the analysis on that. I have someone that helps me on the research and analysis for that, as well as someone that helps me on the investment firm doing analysis and also dealing with clients and so on. So that helps too. And I spend a lot of time with them. And then also, yeah, just a lot of calls with research analysts, and yeah, it's a lot of time, and yeah, it's allergy season in Houston, so I apologize if I
No,
sound
you're
like I'm losing my voice, but that's also going on.
well. I appreciate you making some time for me. Like I said, I couldn't imagine. I mean, you gave me a little bit of a picture of what life is like for you. So thank you for doing this, and we'll follow this along, and I'd love to have you back on.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Mic drop.